this is something that we actually get into on the whole issue of the consolidated audit trail, on a related thing with it, which in its eventual plan will have beneficial owner identified behind every stock trade that's made. Which there's all sorts of interesting money laundering strategies having to do with international stock trades, where you agree to lose money in this market and win money in this market in a different country, and very complicated things are possible and maybe even being done. And the only way that the regulators are able to imagine dealing with that is to have, in the fullness of time, for every completed trade, and in fact every bid and offer, the beneficial owner identified behind that. And moreover, only the regulator that sees everything can net it out. You can't ask one broker to identify whether or not there's some sort of weird manipulation going on based on the fraction of the data they see. Similarly, a bank may see completely legitimate operations from everything they can see and not know that the prices are bogus for the goods that are being traded. And so that ultimately, if you have to solve this problem, it gets more and more intrusive. And so my question, eventually, the only system that you can write down that will work is that the government sees every financial transaction in the place, which smells a lot like China, where, certainly on the commercial side, where everyone pays by cell phone and everyone assumes the government sees every dime that's spent by consumers in China. And, we seem to be, when you're trying to write a system that might work, you rapidly are led down that road. There has to be some single entity that can run massive software, because no set of humans can do this, massive software to look for patterns of suspicious activity. And they have to have access to everything from all countries. And boy, that scares me. Is there any way out of that conundrum, or is that really the only kind of system that will eventually work?
I think there is a way. I mean, I think, again, I don't want to oversell it, but I know on the idea of government industry cooperation, one way around that is to actually have it. I mean, in our country, it's much too dominated by, in a sense, it's police officers, whether FBI, showing up with handcuffs in their pocket, and they're the ones having the discussion with the banks or the companies, and it's intimidating. It should be the intelligence system. It can be I hate to use the word affront. I mean, you want to get around some of the quirks of our system, but you want to have a discussion between our best intelligence people and the people who are dealing with the financial system, and also with the goods that these proliferant states. And that gets around a lot of this. And I think Britain has done an excellent job on this. And I don't think they're
Well, in Britain, does the government have access to all financial transactions if it wants to see them?
No, it doesn't. Obviously it can...
So there's a de minimis threshold, and so how do you avoid large numbers of under de minimis threshold type transactions, for example, unless you can someone has to add them up?
So the way the UK is trying to develop this is by involving the financial sector in discussions around certain forms of threat, whether it's human trafficking, terrorist finance, whatever it might be, educating the financial sector on what to look for, and then wanting them to go back into their systems and say, right, given this information, this understanding, this guidance we've been given by law enforcement or by intelligence services, now let's interrogate our data ourselves. So they're not handing over all the transactions undertaken by one of the big banks. They are being guided.
Isn't this a huge burden on, well, you don't have small banks, but we do here.
We do. We have small banks, don't worry.
Okay, well, wouldn't this just a colossal burden that they have to, every transaction, they have to say, might this be some weird flavor of dual-use goods that we're unaware of? Do they have to have someone trained in dual-use technology at every small bank?
The system that we have created over the last 25 years or so puts a huge burden on the banks, on all banks, full stop. We would not create the system that we have today if we started with a blank sheet of paper today. The way I think we're trying to address that, as I say, is by making the assessments risk-based. So don't spend all your time trying to find everything all the time. focus on this particular area, this particular theme, this lead. And that's what we're trying to do in the UK through this thing, the Joint Money Laundering Intelligence Task Force, which is trying to empower the banking system to be smarter at interpreting their own data themselves.
Ms.
If I,
Rosenberg.
if I may offer a comment following up to this, and that comes through the theme we've been discussing and to your
314
question,
A and B, yeah.
Congressman, yeah, right, on information sharing, if you will. It's not all doom and gloom, and there are some bright spots of partnership in the United States. And it's certainly, if I may just offer a note of praise to this legislation, which suggests that there, to your legislation, Mr. Chairman, prioritizing the threats, if you will, the financial criminal threats. That's an excellent innovation in our current system, and it will help get better at evaluating risk and understanding what are the supervisory priorities, what is the risk. To the issue about information sharing, I'd like to offer some praise for the outstanding work of TFOS at the FBI working on terrorism financing in the United States. They have managed, in what is legitimately a fairly chilly relationship between regulated financial entities in the United States and their regulators, to bridge a number of divides, to have excellent working relationships with financial institutions and with the intelligence community in order to speak together, gather information pursuant to terrorist threats that Orlando, San Bernardino, Las Vegas, ones that affect us here at home, foreign fighters that also affect us, security concerns outside our borders. And they have managed to pioneer a unique in our financial system, in our law enforcement community, relationship, partnership, where they're able to use both those official subpoenas, MLATs, official tools to gather information, and also relationships of trust and constructive exchange between these constituencies to do excellent work. I hope that that kind of model can be used also in the counterproliferation sphere, the WMD folks who work on that issue in the law enforcement community and others. But this is a bright example I think we should hold up and praise and try and see emulated elsewhere in the law enforcement community.
Okay. Mr. Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the note. You know, glad that you called some attention